From 1993's The Crush to 2024's The Miller's Girl, and many others that can fall under this umbrella, I never quite realized just how common it is for this narrative to be shown on screen. And growing up in the age where Poor Things being reviewed and twisted as purest art and a masterpiece that blends beyond beautiful cinema is just flat out disturbing considering its premise. But it does make me want to dissect and look into the history behind this narrative. So that brings me to today's video. Why are grooming victims portrayed on screen as villains? It's easy to watch these films and say, yeah, that does happen. But with the consistency of these films being produced, you would think that it would happen extremely often. So does it? So that's what we're going to be uncovering in today's video. So if you have not, definitely stick around, get comfortable, grab a snack, and make sure to like, subscribe, comment. It all helps out a lot. And if you have time, definitely check out my music afterwards. That's all streaming platforms as well as on the channel here. And get ready for new music very soon. The concept of teenagers is a new one, and during the Middle Ages, it was literally non-existent, as a girl would be considered a woman once she got her period, so that could literally be as young as 8 years old. As for boys, they would be considered a man pretty much once they grew a beard, and so of course with this outline, girls were expected to marry much earlier than their male counterparts. Not to mention that girls were to marry in order to ensure their status and that they would be able to be provided for financially in order to procreate and care for their family whilst upkeeping the house. Which, this can be done much faster than a man can earn a job and receive the funds in order to buy a house and take after the family farm or the family business. To give an example, after 1880, the common woman would begin courting at age 15. And the average age of marriage would be 20 years old, but that was the median age, so it was between the ages of 18 through 22. As for men, it was actually law in 1804 that they could only marry after the age of 18, and average age of marriage was 27, which often was between the ages of 26 to 28. Now, that is a 10-year age range between the youngest woman and the oldest male, and that's just for the average. To give an even earlier historical example, when Cleopatra was 21 years old, she met Julius Caesar, who was 52 at the time, and they would quickly enter an affair and have a child together. They would have this affair for a few years, all the way up until he would eventually pass away. Now, at the time, there was no stigma or law against this, considering she also married her 12-year-old brother when she was 22 during the time of this affair. And she was queen for years at this point. She had the highest education of probably anyone in the world living at this point, considering her family status and wealth of the time. So clearly in 30 BCE there was no law against who you could and could not marry. So when did age of consent come around? This was in England of 1275, when any female of the age of 12 or older would be considered a maiden of age. Notice how they said female? Now, the reason for this was due to and the age 12 was chosen as that was the minimum age to be married at the time for a female. Which is an interesting reason, but counter wins, I guess. And in 1885, age of consent in Delaware was 7 years old. 7. But by 1920, most ages of consent were between 16 and 20 years old. Although, even in today, some countries' age of consent is as low as 11 years old, with the oldest being 21 years old, and then the average being about 18. Gossip media has taken many variations over the years that have come and go, from gossip columns and tabloids of the 2000s and Instagram accounts of the 2010s, and nowadays we're able to see TikTokers share their own insight and opinions on topics in order to form our own morally right opinion. But in order to understand really how much our opinion has changed on certain topics, we have to start from the beginning. Although tabloids and gossipers of these days have such poor reputation that it may be difficult to believe in the early 20th century, gossip columnists were on par with highly respected newspaper journalists. And during his heyday in the 1940s, Wallace attained over 90% of the American public through his columns and radio broadcasts. He was regarded as one of the world's most powerful individuals. These gossip columnists played a crucial role in the Hollywood structure as well. Studio executives knew that a strong movie might boost celebrity appeal, which would then boost box office receipts. Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons in particular were respectable writers and coexisted harmoniously with the studios, as long as they avoided upsetting the studio executives. They would be privy to insider information on the stars. They constantly waited scoops and were bitter rivals. Hedda Hopper became enraged when Joan Crawford married Philip Terry in 1948 and told Luella Parsons first. So, with this information, let's review some real-life connections over the years and their public reception. Described as trash cinema at its finest, The Crush is a 1993 film about a young girl who is inherently obsessed with older men. She sets her eye on and teases them by forcing herself upon them in such a manner that they cannot resist but be attracted of her. It is painted in a way that it is only human, but they should still be ashamed, only for in the end the girl named Adrian to get her target Nick into legal trouble over the matter, and in the end she attacks him, but her parents catch her and she ends up in a psychiatrical hospital where she then stares at a photo of her male doctor, showing that she is still mentally unwell and will continue her behavior. Now, that is a very, very compressed synopsis, but I will dive into some more minor details in a moment here. The movie was Alicia Silverstone's debut feature-length film in which she filmed at 15 years old, playing a 14-year-old character. And it initially wasn't a box office success, but after some legal battles due to the fact that it is a true story that was allegedly blown out of proportion, and the real girl's name having been used but then later changed for video rental release, the film became very popular through cable and video rentals over the years, and it has been labeled a cult film. The movie still has pretty bad reviews, but some praise for a female villain, which wasn't too common before the 2000s, and some were attracted to the age gap, whilst many made it a talking point, considering its portrayal being mostly seductive and therefore it being off-putting, considering the male being twice her age. Now, it's a little hard to find authentic 1993 reviews, so I will dive into my own opinion whilst annotating specific scenarios. Adrian sneaks in at night whilst Nick is working. Nick states, "You sure you're only 14? Adrian replies, "Almost 15. This is her intriguing him by being interested in his work, and at her young age, it's attracting to him. And then she proceeds to smoke his cigarette. This scene is an attempt to make her seem older and more mature in hopes that he'll be okay with an attraction towards her as she's quote-unquote beyond her years in his eyes due to this scenario. Nick shows to the party after Adrian begged him to, but he didn't give a definite yes that he would go. Adrian says, "I knew you'd come." Nick replies, "If you were 10 years older." And Adrian replies, "You'd what?" This was in response to her playing the piano and him being attracted to that as it made her seem beyond her years. And then, a little bit later, Adrian says, "I just wanted you to like me." And Nick says, "Of course I like you." This is him instigating the whole situation of his attraction towards her. Adrian has skipped 2 grades and she's extremely smart and rewrote his work paper as his was horrible and he was struggling to write it. And then her rewrite got him praised at work. This is her placing a power dynamic over him, even though he is actually twice her age, and so he holds a power dynamic over her. She is trying to seem about around his age. He was initially upset over her rewrite, but ultimately he knew that she helped him, and Adrian is twisting him around her finger in order to get him to like her, but is still doing childish things to show her age regardless. As she may be book smart, she is still mentally a child. Because of Adrian skipping 2 grades and behaving as a child, she has almost no friends and is seen as a freak. Nick allowed Adrian to manipulate him and he wanted it, and he enjoyed it until there were any negative consequences, which it was then too late, and so he's just responsible for what happened as he allowed it to happen. Not to mention, inserted himself into and furthering things, making things worse as he stalked her from his window and snuck into her room where he looked at her private belongings and then watched her undress. Literally, this film is so close to being child. It's disgusting, and it could hold weight without this of children, and her able to manipulate him emotionally would validate his side far more. But alas, adults trying to villainize the children and using them as eye candy for their own sick fantasies. Nick confronts Adrian on the swing. "I really like you, Adrian." She says, "I really like you too." He replies, "No, I mean as a friend. Always be your friend, no matter what." "Like that night up at the lighthouse when we kissed?" "No, that was a mistake, Adrian." "Was sneaking in to watch me undress a mistake too? Nick, ever do ever, I know you want to." This shows Adrian's comfortability at this point, as she knows that he's done just as wrong as her, and she knows what he wants, as he's shown his willingness. At this part, she always degrades herself to seem more childlike and innocent, which we also see through her parents. The director Alan Shapiro, as well as one of the screenwriters, based the film off of real-life stories of a decade prior when Shapiro was attempting to make his breakthrough film. Though thought a guest house would do him some good and peace and order to write his big break film, but the underage girl next door took a liking to him and wouldn't take no for an answer. There was no more details of what exactly went down that were stated, but we can assume through the film's possible scenarios what might have gone down. So 10 years later, his wife thought it would make a good suspenseful thriller type of film, but Shapiro was too on the nose and didn't choose a new name for his character, naming the antagonist Darian, which was the same name from the girl from his life. And then she later sued him for this, and in consequence for TV revisions, her name was changed to Adrian, which we now refer to her as.
Bad? Honest. She's just dumb. Always falling in love with some man just because he's good looking.
Pretty much any Marilyn Monroe film has a huge age gap. Some notable ones being The Misfits from 1961, as well as Gentlemen Prefer Blondes from 1953, and How to Marry a Millionaire, also from 1953. They actually painted in a good light. Not only does she like older men, she's craving the older man. They paint it in a good light, the way that a woman can be supported by said rich man, not only supported, but she can be lavished with gifts and expensive tiaras, and this is evident through the quotes. "That's right, because if a girl spends all her time worrying about the money she doesn't have, how is she going to have any time for being in love?" Not only, though, but it isn't so terribly, as the woman in this case is at least 25, I feel. They're usually between the age of 25 and 30, but it is a little weird when you consider the fact that the man in this case is usually between the age of like 50 and 80 years old, so that's way bigger age gap than the woman being, Marilyn Monroe. And in the earlier films of Marilyn, she's usually a little dumb, a little more comedic, and it's more humorous. But in The Misfits from 1961, it's actually much deeper than that. It does pay a little nod to her earlier films, as if the character, had been an actor in her prior years, but something had happened to her that made her extremely sad, and she speaks of how she may be happy, and she speaks of how men usually think that she's happy when really they confuse that with their happiness, and they kind of use her for their own pleasure in a way, and it kind of gets a little deeper there, which is much sadder. Oh, yes. Pretty much any Audrey Hepburn film had an age gap. Poor Audrey Hepburn. Funny Face from 1957, as well as Charade from 1963, both, yes, not just one of them, both of them had a 30-year age gap, which, if I'm correct, is one of the biggest age gaps in any film that just kind of went over people's heads and wasn't really mentioned in the film. Yeah, not only these films, but also her breakout film, one of her biggest films, Breakfast at Tiffany's from 1961, had an age gap. But it wasn't actually Audrey Hepburn in this film who had the age gap. It was her love interest in the film. The male who his previous partner, he was the kept man for, of an older woman. And if I had to guess, though, it wouldn't be 30 years. I would guess that it was probably about 15 to 20 years, which is still a massive age gap. But, I mean, at least it's not the 30 that Audrey was getting in her films before this. So, in all of Audrey Hepburn's films prior to Charade, they had just not mentioned the age gap. So, when 1963 rolled around and Charade was released, they still pursued the age gap, but this time decided to mention it. And in the film, he's pulling away from her and he's calling her a minor, and she's just throwing herself on him. She is just wanting him so bad. She's craving him and cannot live without him. She is helpless without him. And he is... and inevitably he pursues her, but at least the actor acknowledged it and said that he didn't want to be perceived as an disgusting old man, considering the public's perception was pretty scarce towards the idea of the 30-year age gap, considering Audrey Hepburn was not even 30. And these age gaps did not just stay on the screen, they also followed Audrey Hepburn in real life, considering that two of her partners were about 13 years older than her. But to be fair, her first partner was, I believe, 8 years younger than her, so it's quite interesting.
Sticky fingers, Miller.
How are you?
I'm tethered to a landmine.
The Miller's Girl from 2024, unfortunately, starring somehow Jenna Ortega, which leads me to believe that she must have been contractually obligated to do this film, hopefully, but nonetheless, I don't even know where to begin with this film. It is similar to The Crush in the sense that she makes herself seem more mature than her age would suggest by reading books that are beyond her age, writing poems that are suggestive and as also beyond her age. She just turned 18, she lives in a house on her own because her parents leave her there and go on work trips. She's a well-off student, so she pretty much doesn't need to do anything for like the rest of her life. Like, she really is very smart, but because of the fact that she has all of these things that make her seem beyond her years, it's quote-unquote like okay to, you know, pursue her as a love interest, especially considering the fact that she's way beyond okay with it and is pursuing the idea. She is into the idea, and she herself is having all these fantasies. She is the one doing all of the actions, and so therefore it's, you know, okay because she's okay with it when really she's barely 18. Right, there's just so many things wrong with the film. I mean, the way that they speak, I mean, although it is a beautiful script and it's like well thought out, the words and the way that they're structured, it's still just absolutely no way that this is reality. There's also the whole idea that he's in a failed marriage and that's why he, you know, craves any type of rebound, but then it's just still not okay. There's really nothing that he does to push away from the idea other than, you know, submit and then pull away afterwards and then get mad at her for it. It's just terrible. Returning to what I had said prior with the way that they speak just not being reality, it's completely rooted in fantasy. The fantasy of a sick old man who is trying to normalize the idea of attraction towards a, you know, freshly 18-year-old girl. And this is also kind of shown in the way that her friend is also entirely trying to seduce older men with the coach and everything, and then them kissing each other, and it's just being a really weird scene. Multiple scenes, in fact. Just trying to play on the idea that men usually are not the villains in this situation, that it's actually young girls who are on average pursuing these older men in this way, which just such a sick, twisted way to try and villainize young girls and make men seem innocent for their attraction towards them. So if you could not tell, this video did completely lose the script about halfway through, and that is because I had the idea for about 4 months, researching for about 3 months, maybe filming. I filmed that like 2.5 months ago, but it's just been really, it's felt like it's such a chore for me to even pick up and click editing on this video, and so it's just taken so long and gotten out of hand, and that is why I'm going to leave it here, unfortunately. I was supposed to choose from these lists of these movies that I'm showing you now, but it's just gotten really hectic, and it's hard to even continue researching, and so I did just start winging it at the end there and just going into little few films there. But I do hope that you guys enjoyed it regardless, and if you would like to, definitely feel free to pick up on my research and definitely find out the underlying problem here. I applaud you if you do end up doing that, finishing it. Even I couldn't. I just want to move on to next topics already, and so stay tuned for those videos that I have coming up. I do want to get back into it. And if you do like this video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, check out my other videos. I do have an album coming out soon, or an EP, whatever it ends up being, but make sure to check out all my music on streaming platforms. Pantomime is out now. You are listening to that as I speak and as you listen. And that's all. Without further ado, I am gonna go ahead and go off, and I hope you guys have a great day. That's all. Goodbye.